Throughout human history, justice was not always about rehabilitation or law. In many civilizations, punishment was power, visible, physical, and often fatal. What we now call cruel and unusual was once public policy. Leaders used torture and execution to display control, intimidate the public, and even erase people from cultural memory. These punishments weren't just designed to kill. They were meant to destroy the body, break the soul, and sometimes carry the suffering beyond death. Boiling wasn't theatrical. It was elemental. You don't need complex mechanics or mysticism to understand what happens when human flesh is submerged in scalding liquid. This punishment was exactly what it sounds like. The condemned were lowered into large cauldrons of boiling water, tar, or oil, sometimes alive, sometimes gradually as the liquid heated. In Tudor England, under the 1531 Act, it was the official punishment for poisoners. A man named Richard Roos, a cook, was boiled to death in front of a crowd. Witnesses described skin slipping off bone, muscles contracting in agony, and screams that continued long after the body was submerged. To extend the torment, some executioners began with cold liquid, letting the temperature rise slowly. The victim didn't die instantly, they suffered. It could take up to 2 hours. The logic was cruel symmetry. Poison killed from within, so boiling destroyed from without. Other regions, including parts of continental Europe and Japan, also used this punishment. Boiling required no audience explanation. It was a universal horror, and that's what made it effective. Simple, public, unforgettable. For all its physical agony, boiling lacked the elaborate symbolism of other executions. It was raw destruction, a method that turned a living person into meat in front of a crowd. And that is why it opens this list. Rat torture didn't require grand ceremonies or royal decrees. Just a bucket, a fire source, and a few starving rats. It was one of the simplest, yet psychologically devastating punishments ever recorded. The method involved strapping the victim down and placing an open-ended metal container, like a bucket, on their bare abdomen or chest. Inside, live rats. Heat was then applied to the outside of the container using fire or hot coals. In desperation to escape the rising temperature, the rats did the only thing they could: dig downward. They clawed, bit, and chewed their way into the flesh, tunneling through skin, muscle, and sometimes internal organs. The victim wasn't just being eaten alive. They were trapped, fully conscious, feeling every movement of something alive crawling inside them. It wasn't confined to a single culture. During the 16th century Dutch revolt, rebels used it against political prisoners. In England, rumors spread about a rat dungeon in the Tower of London, where vermin emerged with the tides to gnaw at captives. But the method resurfaced in horrifying ways during the 20th century, under Latin American dictatorships, including Chile's under Pinochet and Argentina's Dirty War. Variations of rat torture were used. Some cases involved inserting rats through tubes into the victim's rectum or genitals. This wasn't medieval. This was modern. What makes rat torture uniquely terrifying is that it transforms an everyday pest into a living weapon. There's no myth, no religion, no elaborate machinery, just pure biological horror. And the fact that it has been rediscovered and reused across centuries proves something darker. It works. The Brazen Bull wasn't just a device, it was a performance. A bronze statue built to kill someone slowly while entertaining the crowd with the sound of their agony. According to ancient sources, it was invented in 6th century BCE Sicily by an Athenian named Perillus. He presented it to the tyrant Phalaris as a creative solution for executing criminals. The design was simple but sinister: a hollow bronze bull, large enough to hold a person inside. Once the victim was locked in, a fire was lit beneath the belly. The metal heated gradually, roasting the person alive. But the cruelty didn't stop there. The bull's head contained a system of tubes and acoustic filters that transformed the victim's screams into animal-like bellows. To bystanders, it sounded as if the bull itself was roaring, an illusion that turned torture into theater. Some say Phalaris was so disturbed by Perilaus's invention that he made him the bull's first occupant. Other accounts claim Phalaris used it liberally during his rule, cementing his legacy as one of history's cruelest tyrants. The authenticity of the Brazen Bull is debated. There's no surviving model, but whether it existed or not, the legend persisted for thousands of years. Why? Because it symbolized a very specific kind of evil, one that turns pain into spectacle and innovation into horror. Unlike other punishments on this list, the Brazen Bull doesn't just kill. It transforms a person's last moments into a soundbite, an engineered scream, echoing through bronze for the pleasure of power. Flaying, removing the skin from a living person, was one of the most feared punishments in the ancient world. It was not only a slow, excruciating death, but also a deliberate erasure of a person's dignity and humanity. The victim was restrained, often tied upright to a post or laid out on a platform. Using sharp knives, the executioner made incisions and peeled the skin away in strips. Death came from shock, massive blood loss, hypothermia, or infection. But in some cases, executioners worked slowly enough to keep the victim alive for hours, even longer, ensuring maximum suffering. The Neo-Assyrian Empire made flaying part of state policy. Their kings left stone carvings and inscriptions, boasting of flaying rebels and displaying the skins on city walls or covering pillars. It was a public warning: defy the empire, and your very skin becomes a trophy. Flaying wasn't exclusive to the Assyrians. In ancient Persia, the judge Sesamnes was flayed on orders of King Cambyses II for corruption. His skin was used to upholster the judicial seat his successor would occupy. The Aztecs incorporated flaying into religious rituals, with priests wearing the victim's skin as a symbol of rebirth. In medieval Europe and Ming Dynasty China, it was used against traitors and high-profile criminals. What made flaying unique was its permanence. A body might decay or burn, but tanned human skin could be preserved indefinitely. The act didn't just kill. It turned the victim into a lasting display of power, a warning that outlived the person themselves. Lingchi was practiced in imperial China for over 1,000 years. Formally abolished only in 1905. It was reserved for crimes considered unforgivable: treason, patricide, or mass murder. The condemned was tied to a wooden frame in a public place. The executioner then began slicing away small portions of flesh, starting with the limbs, then the torso, deliberately, avoiding vital organs so the victim would remain alive as long as possible. The process could involve dozens or hundreds of cuts before a final blow ended their life. In some cases, victims were given opium to dull the pain and keep them conscious longer. The mutilated remains were often displayed afterward as part of the punishment. The physical suffering was extreme, but the deeper terror of Lingchi came from its cultural meaning. In Confucian belief, the body was a sacred gift from one's parents, meant to be preserved whole in life and death. Being dismembered meant not only dishonor in this world, but also an incomplete form in the afterlife. The disgrace extended to the victim's family, marking the crime as a stain on an entire lineage. Photographs of Lingchi, taken by foreign soldiers in the early 20th century, spread its reputation worldwide, often stripped of this cultural context. In reality, its horror was both physical and spiritual, designed to punish not just the body, but the soul forever. Scaphism was an ancient Persian punishment described by Greek historians, and whether every detail is literal or partly exaggerated, its design was meant to be unforgettable. The condemned was placed inside a hollowed-out wooden structure, two boats stacked together, or a carved log, leaving only the head, hands and feet exposed. The victim was then force-fed a mixture of milk and honey, smeared with the same sweet mixture on their skin, and left under the sun, often near stagnant water. The result was a perfect breeding ground for insects. Flies, wasps, and other pests swarmed the exposed flesh. Meanwhile, the forced diet caused severe diarrhea, filling the enclosed space with filth that attracted even more vermin. Over days, sometimes more than 2 weeks, maggots and worms would infest the body, burrowing into flesh and organs while the victim remained alive. One recorded case describes a Persian soldier named Mithridates, who was allegedly subjected to Scaphism for claiming credit for a royal killing. Greek accounts claim he survived for 17 days before dying from dehydration, infection, and septic shock. Even if some historical details were exaggerated by Persian enemies, the idea alone was enough to cement Scaphism as one of history's most grotesque punishments, turning the human body into its own prison and source of decay. Crucifixion is one of the most well-known execution methods in history, remembered largely through the Roman Empire's use of it. It was designed for maximum suffering, humiliation, and public visibility. The process often began with scourging, whipping severe enough to tear flesh and weaken the victim. Then the condemned carried the horizontal crossbeam, or patibulum, to the execution site. There, they were tied or nailed to a cross, stake, or tree, positioned so that breathing became a struggle. Death didn't come quickly. Modern medical research suggests it was caused by a combination of factors: blood loss, shock, dehydration, organ failure, and exhaustion from constantly pushing up to breathe. In some cases, victims lingered for days before dying. Crucifixion was reserved for those considered the lowest in Roman society: slaves, rebels, pirates, and non-citizens. Roman citizens were generally exempt, with beheading considered a more honorable death. The location of crucifixions was deliberate, often alongside major roads, ensuring travelers and locals saw the consequences of defying imperial authority. Beyond the physical agony, crucifixion stripped the condemned of dignity and status, marking them as outsiders unworthy of burial within the city's sacred limits. It was a public warning, visible proof of Rome's power and the fate awaiting anyone who challenged it. The breaking wheel, also called the Catherine wheel, was a method of execution used across Europe for centuries, designed to destroy the body in full public view. The condemned was tied down, sometimes to the ground, sometimes to a large wooden wheel or an X-shaped cross. The executioner, using a heavy iron bar, struck the limbs at specific points, often with blocks of wood placed beneath to ensure the bones snapped cleanly. Sentences could dictate the number and order of blows. In merciful executions, a final strike to the chest or neck ended the ordeal quickly. In others, the process began at the legs and worked upward, keeping the victim alive for hours. Once broken, the body was woven through the spokes of the wheel. The wheel was then mounted on a pole, leaving the person, dead or dying, exposed to the elements and scavenging animals. The punishment carried a deeper message. In medieval belief, dying without an intact body could affect one's soul in the afterlife. Leaving the remains to rot in public was a way to deny the condemned spiritual peace. The breaking wheel was abolished gradually in the 19th century, but for hundreds of years, it stood as a brutal warning. The state could not only end your life, but desecrate your body for all to see. In medieval England, this was the ultimate punishment for high treason, an execution designed to erase the traitor from life, legacy, and memory. The process began with the drawing. The condemned was tied to a wooden hurdle or panel and dragged by horse through the streets to the execution site. This public humiliation marked them as removed from the community they had betrayed. Next came the hanging. The traitor was suspended by the neck until near death, then cut down while still conscious. Immediately afterward, the executioner emasculated the victim and disemboweled them, often burning the entrails in front of their eyes. In the medieval mindset, this was symbolic, destroying the physical seat of betrayal and ensuring no lineage could continue. Finally came beheading and quartering. The head was severed, and the body divided into 4 parts. These remains were parboiled in tar to slow decay, and then displayed on city gates or bridges as a public warning. London Bridge was a common sight for traitors' heads, staring down at those entering the city. Notable victims include William Wallace in 1305, and many others who defied the crown. It was a punishment meant not only to kill, but to dismantle a person entirely, physically, socially, and symbolically, leaving nothing whole to remember. Impalement was one of the most feared execution methods in history, notorious for the agony it caused and the message it sent. It involved forcing a sharpened stake through the body, either lengthwise or crosswise, and leaving the victim suspended until death. The most infamous practitioner was Vlad III of Wallachia, known as Vlad the Impaler. In the 15th century, he used impalement not just as punishment for crimes, but as psychological warfare against invading Ottoman forces. In one of the most chilling accounts, Sultan Mehmed II's army encountered a forest of some 20 impaled corpses outside Târgoviște. The sight alone was enough to force a retreat. The method varied. In some cases, the stake was driven through the torso, killing quickly. But in its most feared form, the stake was inserted through the rectum or vagina, and carefully guided to avoid vital organs, prolonging life. Victims could survive for hours or even days before dying from blood loss, shock, or organ failure. Impalement was practiced in various cultures, from ancient Babylon to the Ottoman Empire, often in public places to maximize its deterrent effect. It was both an execution and a statement. Power could not only take your life, but do so in a way that terrified everyone who saw it. For its combination of prolonged suffering, public display, and use as a tool of mass intimidation, impalement stands as the worst punishment in human history.